All right. Hello, everyone. This is Evelyn here, and today I just wanted to make a video about how I go about writing art songs. So, on the screen right now, you can see a poem that I found. I'm working on a song cycle right now that's supposed to take monster poems and turn them into these theatrical art song compositions with singing, obviously, dancing, that sort of thing, choreography. So yeah, let's just take a quick look at what I've done. So I did some research and I found this poetry book titled "Poetry." Monsterverse Poems Human and Inhuman by yeah, I forget who wrote this. I've got the book right here. Luckily, it was available at my library. So, the first thing that I'm going to do when I set this poem is analyze it. So, let's take a look at my iPad. So, one of the first things that you'll want to do is just read the poem poetically. You might go something like this. Curls stitching soft onto trampled newspaper, she lay there alone, knowing no one could save her. Blood rusting into a martyr's damp cloth, a shadow of shame in which she would drown. Gauzy lace tethered of ivory veiled, her poor severed head, blood freckled and pale. Black lashes fluttering like broken moth wings, surrender wet pearls salt the wound that sting. As it cut down her face, scratching rosy black, evidence of her blind lover's attack. Charmed by the thought of skin without scales, she had fallen to each one of his tales, and in this manner had agreed to wed a man who wished only to see her dead. Curls weeping soft onto trampled newspaper, she lay there alone, knowing no one could save her. No one echoed to tears in her eyes. She lay there alone, save the company flies. Poor butchered bride, crying on the floor, headless little girl whom no one adored. So, quite a sad poem from the perspective of Medusa. And what I'm going to do first is mark some prosody. So, as an example, I'm going to show you this excerpt of a poem that I set where I put in some stress marks and highlighted some words. So, I use this symbol to say a not stress word. So a, and then a line to emphasize a stressed word. So a long night I spent. So let's go and do that now for part of this. So, and to do this, you really just need to read the poem out loud and see how you want to do it. There's no real correct way to do this. Sometimes there is a correct stress pattern, and sometimes you can be a little funny with it, but we're going to do something pretty standard. Curls slithering, so curls slithering, soft onto trampled newspaper. And you can go and you can do this for the entire poem. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to give you a guide of where to put different syllables in your setting. So if I open up Sibelius, let's just do one note for now. And I'm going to put on my headphones so that I can hear it. So let's just do one note for now. So curls, slid, and I might make this a dotted word, dotted to emphasize it even more. Slithering. So, if I were to play this out, curls slithering, curls slithering. Or if I were to do it just marking the quarter notes, curls slithering. And that's got a pretty nice flow to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the poem and I'm going to mark a bunch of words. Let's stick with just these first two lines for now. She lay there alone, knowing no one could save her. And now the next thing that you will notice in this poem is that the stress marks are not consistent. That's not always the same for different poems. Some poems rhyme, some poems have constant stress patterns. This poem rhymes, but does not have constant stress patterns, and that's okay. It will just make our setting a little bit more interesting. So this line is interesting because the stress patterns could be different. You could read it, her poor severed head, blood freckled and pale. Or you could read it how I've marked it, her poor severed head, blood freckled and pale. That is putting more emphasis on the word blood, which is coming after a comma. You could not emphasize it. You could also say blood freckled and pale. I think that sounds a little bit weird. Or you could say blood freckled and pale. So here is somewhere where you can make some choices. So far what we've been doing is setting the prosody by putting the stressed words on 1, 2, 3, and 4, and putting the unstressed words on the ands. Now, obviously, this can work in different time signatures too. You can do something in 12/8 where you put the off stresses on la and li. So if you're not familiar with, I don't know if they're called solfege, but like if you're doing 12/8, you could say 1 lolly, 2 lolly, 3 lolly, 4 lolly, 1 lolly, 2 lolly, 3 lolly, 4 lolly. And you can place your unstressed on that. So like I'm just looking at this right now, and there aren't a whole lot of moments where there are two unstressed in a row. But when there are, you can do a few things. So we will look. Let's skip ahead. Let's continue doing this line. So curls slithering. Curls slithering soft onto trampled newspaper, something like that. So I think what I'm going to do here is use a dotted quarter note again. And then I'm going to do another eighth note leading into a quarter note. So this is over the line. Soft onto trampled. And here we come to an interesting point. This is the first time where we have two unstressed words in a row, two unstressed syllables in a row. So let's do some experimenting. The first thing that I want to notice, though, before I do that, is see if there are any patterns coming up so far. So we have this dotted eighth quarter kind of coming in. And that marks out a measure of 3/4. So what I'm actually going to do first is choose my time signature. I'm going to make this 3/4, but I'm actually going to start it with a pickup. What you can do is you can go to home, split, normal, and there we go. And then you can delete this. And this is what we call a pickup. It means that you start with a measure of essentially 1/4, you start at the end of a bar of 3/4. So let's see how this sounds in 3. Curls slithering soft onto trampled. That sounds pretty good so far. So what I can do here is to work out the line newspaper, which is stressed, not stressed, not stressed. Is I can do a few things. I'm gonna start with the one that I think won't work, and that's doing a triplet. Trample. So, trampled. So that's what this would look like. So to read this, curls slithering soft onto trampled newspaper. So I don't think that that worked very well. We could try a quarter note triplet. So I decided to put this on a wood block just to emphasize the rhythms even more so that we can just sing along with this. Curls slithering soft onto trampled newspaper. I think it sounds a little bit awkward. I'm going to delete this from the bass part for now and just use the wood block. Curls slithering soft onto trampled newspaper. Actually, this is growing on me a little bit. If I really sing it, curls slithering soft onto trampled newspaper. Yeah. It has this rushing sort of vibe. So I'm going to make this a measure of 5/4, and just bear with me. And I'm going to see if I can repeat this pattern, see if it works well. She lay there alone. That works. So I'm actually going to change my prosody. She lay there alone. Lay there alone, knowing no. Alone, knowing no one. Curls slithering soft onto trampled newspaper. She lay there alone, knowing no one could save. Okay, so this is what I came up with for the first 2 lines. Now, I know time signatures are scary and all, but for me to get it to fit, I had this idea and I figured that I would try it. So, curls slithering soft onto trampled newspaper. She lay there alone, knowing no one could save her. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So you've kind of got this like pushing and pulling sort of feel right now, and I'm wondering if I can get that sort of thing to work. So now with that, let's try to put this into the bass part. Let's come up with a vocal melody line. First off, we need to decide what key we want this to be in. So this is for me to sing. So what we want to decide here is, what is my range? The lowest note that I can comfortably hit is an E. Well, I'd say I can hit an E, but I want this to be powerful, and I want this to be, so I'm going to say maybe an A is my lowest note. Let's see what an A sounds like in my voice. Ah, ah, dwa. That was out of tune. Sorry about that. No. So I think that an A might be a good note to hit. So let's try out A Phrygian. Well, do I want to do Phrygian again? Because I did do Phrygian in the Jabberwocky. Um, Maybe this is more of a Dorian feel. Um, let's try Dorian. So if we want this to be an A Dorian, our key signature would be a whole note below A, which is G. So I'm going to do G major. And if you think of Padmil, it's minor, but with a sharp 6. In solfege, this would be do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, te, do, te, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do. So, we're going to work in this scale. Now, the second question is, do I want... Now I'm second guessing myself because in the Jabberwocky, when I set that, the lowest note was do for me, and I would sing "'Twas brillig and the slithy toves." But maybe I want this to actually start on sol. So maybe I should make the scale C Dorian, which would be B flat would be the key signature. B flat major. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, te, do, te, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do. Okay, so let's start. I'm going to delete this all from the bass line. And maybe we start on sol. So that would be A. I'm going to bring up the level of the bass so that we can actually hear it. And if we're starting on a pickup, we typically want to start with a resolution. So, sol, la, te, do, curl, slithering, soft. So that's sol, do, te, le, sol, la. One, two. Do we feel like this is a rising moment or a falling moment? Curl slithering soft onto trample. I feel like we need to continue this pattern. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this here. Trampled newspaper. That was a quarter note. That wasn't a quarter note triplet, but curls slithering soft onto trampled newspaper. She lay there alone. Alone. She lay there alone. Okay. Yeah, I can roll with this. Okay. So I think I have something good down. Okay, so I'm gonna reduce the BPM by a lot. I'm gonna put it on 70 and see how that feels. Curls slithering soft onto trampled newspaper, she lay there alone, knowing no one could save her. So, what we have, so these are the first two lines, and now I'm going to put some piano under it. And I'm going to make sure that the piano really establishes the mode of Dorian, because right now this doesn't sound like Dorian. Okay, so as you could see in the editing, I did make a little mistake in that I accidentally wrote in Phrygian, but that's okay because I kind of just ended up in Dorian toward the end of it, just because my ears were like, this doesn't sound like Dorian. Anyway, so I just wanted to go over how I figured out the different modes. So there are two mnemonics, and there's a wonderful video by my professor David Newman, who that goes over this, but I'm going to briefly go over it too. So there's this thing called PADMIL, and it's this mnemonic we use to determine which modes appear where. So there are two highlights of this. A is Aeolian, and I is Ionian. This is also known as major and minor. So, what we do is we have these arrows here. So this reads Phrygian, Aeolian, Dorian, Mixolydian, Ionian, Lydian. So P for Phrygian is we do a flat 2. So you can see this arrow right here. This arrow right here. We will, that means you're going to do something flat. This D means a sharp 6. So Dorian is minor, but instead of having la, instead of having lay, we have la. So do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, te, do, or do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, te, do. Mixolydian has a flat 7. So that would be do, re, mi, because this is Ionian with a flat 7. So it has mi, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, te, do. So it's just major, but with a flat 7. So you have te instead of t. Then we have Ionian, which is just major. And finally, we have Lydian, which is a sharp 4. Or instead of fa, we do fi. So that is do, re, mi, fi, sol, la, ti, do. So this is how I'm kind of figuring it out. There's a second mnemonic that I really like. I don't particularly like meat and loaf. So what this tells you is if you have a scale and you started on, say, C, that would be major. If you started on D, that would be Dorian. If you started on E, that would be Phrygian. If you started on F, that would be Lydian. If you start on G, that would be Mixolydian. If you start on A, that would be minor or Aeolian. And if you start on B, that would be Locrian. Now, you'll notice that PADMIL, we don't have a Locrian in here. That's because Locrian is very rarely used, so it's not that necessary. And that's mostly because the one chord is a tritone, which is unstable, so it's difficult to write in Locrian. Though you can do it, there are ways to do it, and I might do a video on that. But anyway, so when I was figuring out how to write in the certain mode, and the key signature associated with it, what I would do is I would look at where this says Ionian, which is major, and if we wanted to go to Dorian, we would start it one whole step later. Now I'm going to go ahead and write in, we have whole, I'm actually going to not do the arrows. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And so if I want to go from Ionian to Dorian, I go up a whole step. If I wanted to be in Phrygian, I would go up 2 steps, which is what I accidentally did. If I wanted to be in Lydian, I would go up whole, whole, half, and then I'm in Lydian. So if I wanted to, so I was writing the time signature, key signature of B flat major, and if I go up a whole step from B flat major, you end up in C, which is Dorian, which is what I tried to do, but then I just wrote the wrong note for sol, and I went based off of all of that. So that's how you figure out modes. Now, the next thing that I want to look at involving modes is the emotional characteristics of it. And for that, I'm going to go back to Padmel. So the notes that, so I like to think of modes in Padmel when I'm doing the actual work of writing in modes rather than the I don't particularly like meat and loaf. And that's because it tells you the actual emotional characteristics. So in Phrygian, you would really want to emphasize the ra or the flat 2. Do, ra. So you want to emphasize that. So wherever you can get either a 2 chord in, a 7 chord, or a 5 chord, you will get that Phrygian sound. I say especially the 5 chord gives you a really Phrygian sound because the 5 chord is diminished, which is something that I use in this piece. Then with Dorian, you have the sharp 6. So if you really want to emphasize the fact that you're in Dorian, you might want to emphasize the 3rd being minor, as well as the 6th being major. So that means that you would want to use, obviously, the 1 chord, the 3 chord, and the 3 chord, and maybe but especially you want to use the 6 chord because that's built off of La, and it includes May. It includes May, so it includes two character defining moments in Dorian. With that in mind, you can go through and you can do all of this for the rest of this. So for Mixolydian, you would have the flat 7 in there and the major 3rd. Those are its 2 defining characteristics. And for Lydian, you would have the sharp 4 and the major 3rd. So as long as you can emphasize those 2 notes, you can sound like you're in whatever scale. So quick segue out of the way. And now, with that in mind, I just realized that the piano wasn't recording and that I can do a better explanation of what I was doing here. So, I already went ahead and wrote these piano lines in, but I'm going to go back and explain my decision making. So, we're starting on a pickup, and typically with pickups, you want to do a resolution, so you're going to want to go from sol to do in some capacity. And in Phrygian, this is A Phrygian, D Phrygian, sol is A, so you start with sol, do, so just some type of cadence. Now, I just included 1 note here. You can do an entire chord, but I thought it sounded nice. So, this is a D minor chord, and this is an A diminished chord. So, what I wanted to do was have this tension brought in, so I just did a 1, 5 diminished, 1, right? Yeah, so this is, sorry, not 1, 3. So 1, 5, 3, which honestly sounds a little bit weird out of context, but over the vocal line it makes sense. So this goes curls slithering soft onto trampled newspaper. So now this chord is a is a D minor chord, again, over A, which is our 1 chord that we have right here, which is just touched upon very lightly. This is to just remind us, yes, we are in Phrygian, but let's move on. So, how did I choose, but I'm going to back up for a second. So how did I choose this chord? I looked at these 3 notes, trampled newspaper. So we have an A, a C, and then this passing note of a B flat. So you want this to go with a vocal melody line, so we choose to include A and C in there, and we could just ignore this B flat. But so our choices are to do an A chord, A, C, E flat, or we could do an F chord, so F, A, C. So I decided that I wanted to do something interesting, and you don't typically hear the 3 chord in here, and this is an F major chord, by the way. In Phrygian, it's F major. But just so that you can hear how it sounds like, I'm going to delete these 2 notes. And hit 3 to go up a third. And then I'm actually going to invert this chord for better voice leading. Slithering soft onto trampled newspaper, she lay. That is what that chord sounds like. Honestly, you know, it's good to experiment because I originally just defaulted this, but now I actually kind of like this more. So I'm going to stick with it. Next, we have the chord under she, which is just a D minor chord, or our 1 chord in Phrygian. So this is just to slightly touch on the 1 chord, remind us that we are in fact, Phrygian, not Dorian, Phrygian, before launching into the next section, which starts on an F chord, which is our 3 chord in Phrygian. So the 3 chord in Phrygian, I think, is a little bit ambiguous. It doesn't include the flat 2 in Phrygian, which you typically want to emphasize. It includes me, sol, and te. So what this is doing is it's clearly establishing that the mode that you're in is minor, without defining the actual characteristic notes that are in minor. So I did a 3 chord here, and it's just a little bit bitter sounding, to me at least. It's a little bit bittersweet sounding. It is a major chord, but of course this is emphasizing me in the key. But really, when I was writing this, again, I just took F and A, and I put a fifth on top of it, and that created my chord. So now, you're going to see that I do some things that are out of key. Of course, I said this would be in Phrygian, but for the most I said it was in Dorian. For the most part, it's going to be in Phrygian up until this point. I've decided that I'm going to switch to C Dorian after this, do a mode switch. So here I go into something that I think is interesting. So this is the 2 chord, though in Phrygian the 2 chord is usually major, but I decided that I wanted it to be diminished, which is something that you can do known as modal interchange. So what I am doing is I'm doing a modal interchange with So what I'm doing is modal interchange with Aeolian, because in Aeolian the 2 chord is diminished, also known as minor. So we have this diminished chord, which just comes in and it's so bitter, landing on what should be a major key. So, lay there, sorry. Lay there alone, alone. It's so bitter to put in that chord there. And next I do something else that's out of key. I do an E minor chord. And what's interesting about this chord is it takes away the characteristic Phrygian sound by raising the 2 back to being a whole step above 1. So what this is really doing is a secondary dominant. So, as mentioned previously, a dominant chord is a chord that's supposed to lead back to a tonic chord. So 5 is a dominant chord, 7 is a dominant chord, diminished 7 is a dominant chord. So what I have done here is use what's known as a secondary dominant. And this is the diminished 7 of natural 2 in Phrygian. So what is a secondary dominant? It's where you superimpose a resolution into a point in the scale where there typically wouldn't be one, or using dominant to tonic motion to emphasize another chord. Okay, so I'm going to give an example of a secondary dominant. We're going to use C major. So what I'm going to play is, starting with this, is just to establish, well, first to establish in the key. So that was just 1 4 5 4 1. So the first thing I'm going to do is play a C chord, and then a 5 chord. Sorry, a 5 chord, and then a 1 chord. So let's say that we want to make this chord progression a little bit more interesting. What we can do is add a 5 of 5 chord, and in that case, that would sound like this: 1, 5 of 5, includes this note, which is out of the key, and then we resolve this to this chord, which is our 5 chord. We can include this note to make it even more obvious that's the 5, and then back to 1. So altogether, that sounds like this. So it just adds that little bit of a flair, and essentially how this is working is it tonicizes, which means making into the tonic, our 5 chord. And you can also do this with diminished chords, which I have done in this example. So typically, a 1, diminished 7, 1 sounds like that. It sounds like a dominant chord, but if I wanted to do, so this is our 5 chord, and if I wanted to do a diminished tonicization of this, I would play this chord. Very interesting. So I decided to go with the diminished in this case. So that sounds like... and what is particularly interesting about this tonicization is that it tonicizes outside of the key signature. And in this case, it actually makes it sound a little bit more like Dorian for just a brief moment. But then I switch back to having the flat in there. And then I also include the natural E, so the natural 2 in the vocal line. That's a change I made. And then I go up to C and resolve down to C. and play a C minor chord. So, and you will notice that this emphasis on C now actually makes it Dorian. So, what my plan is for the rest of this piece is to continue switching between Phrygian and Dorian depending on the mood that we're talking about. So, if I look in the book, the next line is blood rusting into a martyr's damp crown, a halo of shame in which she would drown. So I think that Dorian could fit this part really well. But yeah, thank you. Back to past me. Actually, before we go, I'm going to briefly mute the woodblock, and I'm going to sing this for you. Curls slithering soft onto trampled newspaper, she lay there alone, knowing no one could save her. So, that is the first 2 lines of the poem. I am going to continue working on this, and if anything interesting comes up, I will make a follow-up video. So yeah, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and yeah, see you later.